Ambassador Veltar stood in the communication center watching his world die. Outside the thick crystal windows, the city of New Zephyr burned under a sky filled with black clouds. The Void Swarm had arrived 3 days ago, and nothing could stop them. These metal creatures ate everything they touched and grew stronger with each meal. The tall, blue-skinned alien pressed his long fingers against the control panel. His people had ruled this galaxy for over 10,000 years. They had built cities that floated in space and weapons that could crack planets in half. But none of that mattered now. The Void Swarm destroyed everything the same way. They landed on a world, ate all the metal and technology, then moved to the next planet like hungry insects. Veltar looked at the reports coming in from across the galaxy. 12 different species had already fallen to the swarm, and 90 Corvin. Empire with their crystal ships had lasted only 6 days. The machine builders of Proxima 7 had tried to fight technology with technology and then consumed in hours. Even the warrior clans of Beta Centauri, with their famous battle fleets, had been swept away like leaves in a storm. The communication officer, a young female named Kelsa, turned to face him. Her normally bright purple eyes were dim with fear. "Ambassador, we have lost contact with the outer colonies. The defense grid around the capital has fallen. The swarm will reach the planetary core in less than 2 days." Veltar nodded slowly. He had expected this news, but it still hit him like a physical blow. What about the evacuation ships? The few that launched were destroyed before reaching orbit. The swarm has complete control of local space. Nothing gets in or out. The old ambassador walked to the great viewing screen that showed the galaxy. Thousands of star systems glowed like tiny jewels against the black of space. So many worlds, so many different kinds of life. All of it would be gone if the swarm reached the galactic core. The ancient computers there controlled the hyperspace, lanes that connected every civilized world. If those fell, the swarm could spread everywhere at once. "Sir," Kelsa said quietly, "the Council of Worlds has sent their final message. They cannot spare any more ships. Every species is falling back to defend their home systems." Veltar was not surprised. The Galactic Council had tried everything they could think of. Plasma weapons that could melt asteroids barely scratched the swarm's hull. Quantum bombs that twisted space itself only made the creatures stronger. Psychic attacks that could break. Minds had no effect on things that might not even be truly alive. He had read all the reports. The Void Swarm seemed to learn from every attack. When ships fired energy weapons, the swarm grew shields that reflected energy. When they used physical projectiles, the creatures developed armor that turned solid matter to dust. It was like fighting an enemy that became immune to whatever hurt it. "Open the emergency broadcast system," Veltar said. "Send the signal on all frequencies, all languages, every channel we have." Kelsa looked confused. "Sir, who would we call?" "Every major species has already refused to help or been destroyed. Then we call the minor ones. We call everyone. Someone out there might have an idea we have not thought of." The young officer worked at her controls. "The system is ready, Ambassador." Veltar took a deep breath and began to speak. "To any species capable of receiving this transmission, this is Ambassador Veltar of the Zephyrian Republic speaking for the Galactic Council. We face an enemy that threatens all life in this galaxy. The Void Swarm has destroyed dozens of worlds and consumed entire star systems. Our greatest weapons have failed. Our strongest shields have fallen. If you can help in any way, please respond. We do not ask for much. Any knowledge, any weapon, any idea that might slow down this enemy. Time is running out for all of us." He ended the message, and Kelsa sent it racing across space at faster than light speed. It would reach every inhabited system in the galaxy within hours. But Veltar did not expect any answers. What could primitive species do that the advanced civilizations could not? For 3 hours they waited in silence. The communication board stayed quiet, except for automated distress signals from dying worlds. Then something changed. A new signal appeared on the screen, weak but clear. Kelsa checked her instruments twice before speaking. "Ambassador, we have a response. The signal is coming from the outer rim, a system called Sol. The third planet shows signs of basic technology, but no faster than light travel." Veltar frowned. A species that had not even left their home system? What could they possibly offer? "Play the message." A strange voice filled the room, speaking in a language the computer had to translate. The words were simple but firm. "This is Earth Command responding to your distress call. We received your message about the Void Swarm. Help is on the way. Repeat, help is on the way. Stay strong." Kelsa stared at her instruments. "Sir, according to our database, this species calls themselves humans. Their technology level is barely above nuclear fusion. They have no faster-than-light ships, no energy shields, no quantum weapons. Their most advanced craft appears to be chemical rockets." Veltar almost laughed, but the sound died in his throat. These humans were promising to help when species 1,000 times more advanced had given up. Either they were very brave or very foolish. Maybe both. "Send a reply," he said. "Tell them we appreciate their offer, but the distance between their world and ours would take thousands of years to cross with their technology." The response came back surprisingly fast. "Understood. We are working on that problem. Estimated arrival time is 3 days. Earth Command out." Kelso looked at the ambassador with wide eyes. 3 days? "Sir, that is impossible. To travel from their system to ours in 3 days would require technology we do not even understand." Veltar stared at the communication screen. Perhaps these humans were simply insane. But right now, insane hope was better than no hope at all. Outside the windows, his city continued to burn as the void swarm grew stronger. In 3 days, he would learn what kind of species promised impossible things and actually meant to keep their word. The old ambassador returned to watching his world die, but for the first time in weeks, he wondered if death might not be the end of this story after all. 3 days passed like a nightmare for Ambassador Veltar. The void swarm had eaten half his world and was moving toward the capital city. The great towers that had stood for thousands of years were now twisted metal being consumed by the hungry machines. His people huddled in underground shelters, waiting for the end dot. Then space itself seemed to tear open. Kelsa screamed at her instruments as readings went completely wild. "Ambassador, something is happening in high orbit. Space is twisting in ways our sensors cannot understand." Veltar rushed to the viewing screen and saw something impossible. A hole had opened in the fabric of reality itself, glowing with strange blue light. From this wound in space, ships began to emerge. They were unlike anything in the galactic database. Where council ships were smooth and elegant, these vessels looked rough and brutal. They were built from gray metal and white ceramic, with sharp angles that seemed designed for war rather than beauty. "How many ships?" Veltar asked. 237, sir." "No, wait. More are coming through. 300. 400. They keep coming." The ships that emerged were different sizes. Some were as small as fighter craft, while others were massive vessels that could hold thousands of crew members. But they all shared the same rough, practical look. These were machines built by a species that cared more about function than form. A communication signal reached the command center. Kelsa patched it through, and a human voice filled the room. "Zephyrian Command, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the UES Defiance. We are responding to your distress call. Please provide current tactical situation and enemy positions." Veltar stepped forward. Captain Morrison, this is Ambassador Veltar. We are grateful for your arrival, but I must warn you. The Void Swarm has destroyed every fleet sent against it. These creatures adapt to any weapon used against them. Your ships may be in great danger. Understood, Ambassador. We would like to meet with your leadership to discuss the situation. Can you provide landing coordinates for a diplomatic shuttle? Within an hour, a human shuttle landed at the Zephyrian Command Center. Veltar had expected creatures similar to other galactic species, but the humans looked completely different. They had hair covering their heads in various colors, and their skin came in different shades. Most shocking of all, they had only 2 eyes instead of the 4 that most intelligent species possessed. Captain Morrison was a tall human with brown hair and green eyes. He wore a blue uniform covered in small metal decorations. Next to him stood Admiral Lisa Hayes, an older human female with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Behind them came a younger human male called Commander Ryan Blake, who carried strange devices that beeped and flashed with lights. "Thank you for coming," Veltar said, "though I fear you have traveled far to witness our destruction." Admiral Hayes looked at the tactical displays showing swarm positions. "Show us everything you know about this enemy. How they move, how they fight, how they reproduce." For the next 2 hours, Veltar and his staff shared everything they knew about the Void Swarm. The humans listened carefully and asked many questions. But their questions were strange. Instead of asking about the swarm's energy output or technological specifications, they wanted to know simple things. "How fast do they move on the ground?" Captain Morrison asked. "Do they have any kind of command structure?" Admiral Hayes wanted to know, "What materials do they avoid eating?" Commander Blake inquired. The Zephyrians tried to explain that such simple questions missed the point. The swarm was too advanced for basic tactics to work. But the humans kept asking their basic questions and taking notes on primitive paper tablets. Commander Blake studied the data about swarm technology. After an hour, he looked up with a strange expression. "Admiral, I think I see what we are dealing with. This is not true adaptive technology." "Explain," Admiral Hayes said. "The swarm follows patterns. When attacked with energy weapons, it always develops the same type of energy shield. When hit with projectiles, it creates the same kind of armor. It is not really adapting. It is following a program with preset responses." Veltar could not believe what he was hearing. "Commander Blake, our greatest scientists have studied this enemy for months. The swarm learns from every encounter." "It learns, yes, but only in predictable ways," Blake replied. "Like a computer following if-then statements. If energy weapon, then energy shield. If physical attack, then physical armor. But what if we use something it has no program for?" "Captain." Morrison smiled, and Veltar noticed that humans showed their teeth when they were pleased. It was a frightening sight. "What did you have in mind, Blake?" "Well, sir, according to this data, the swarm has never encountered chemical explosives, kinetic projectiles, or nuclear weapons. Every species that fought them used advanced energy, weapons, and exotic matter technology." Admiral Hayes nodded slowly. "So we go back to basics. Bullets, bombs, and good old-fashioned violence." "Ma'am," Morrison said, "the crew is going to love this." Veltar felt confused and worried. "You plan to fight advanced technology with primitive weapons?" "Not primitive," Blake corrected. "Unexpected. Sometimes the best way to solve a complex problem is with a simple solution." The humans began planning their attack with an enthusiasm that amazed and frightened the Zephyrians. They talked about kinetic bombardment and nuclear saturation as if they were discussing the weather. Admiral Hayes assigned different ship groups to different tasks with military efficiency that impressed even Veltar. "Captain Morrison, Take your task force and begin orbital bombardment of swarm positions near the capital. Use conventional explosives only. I want to see how they react to chemical detonations. Yes, ma'am. Should we avoid populated areas? Negative. The Zephyrians have good shelter systems. Focus on maximum swarm casualties. As the humans prepared for battle, Veltar realized something that both thrilled and terrified him. These creatures were not just willing to fight an impossible enemy. They were excited about it. They talked about the coming battle like it was a game they intended to win. Commander Blake was already modifying human weapons based on swarm data. If their standard response to kinetic attacks is ceramic armor, then we hit them with tungsten penetrators. If they adapt to that, we switch to high explosive fragmentation. Keep them guessing. Admiral Hayes looked at the tactical display one more time. Gentlemen, we have 3 days before the swarm reaches the planetary core. Time to show these machines why you should never threaten someone's neighbors. As the human fleet moved into attack position, Veltar wondered what kind of species these humans really were. They had crossed impossible distances to answer a cry for help from strangers. Now they were about to fight an enemy that had destroyed civilizations with weapons their own people considered outdated. Either humanity was the bravest species in the galaxy, or the most insane. Veltar was beginning to think it might be both. The first human attack began at dawn. Ambassador Veltar watched from the command center as Captain Morrison's ships moved into position above the largest swarm concentration. The Zephyrian had expected energy beams and exotic weapons like other species used. Instead, he saw something completely different. Long metal rods fell from the human ships like rain. They were simple tungsten bars with no electronics or energy signatures. The swarm machines below seemed confused by these basic projectiles. Their sensors were designed to detect advanced weapons, not chunks of metal moving at incredible speed. When the rods hit, they struck with the force of small nuclear weapons. The kinetic energy from their speed alone was enough to punch through swarm armor and destroy entire formations. Explosions rocked the ground as hundreds of the metal creatures were smashed to pieces. Incredible, Kelsa whispered. They are using pure physics as a weapon. But Veltar knew the celebration would be short. Watch carefully. The swarm will adapt now. Sure enough, the surviving swarm machines began changing. Their black metal bodies grew thicker and more angular. New armor plating appeared that could deflect kinetic impacts. Within minutes, the tungsten rods were bouncing off without causing damage. Captain Morrison's voice came over the communication system. Swarm has adapted to kinetic bombardment. Switching to Plan B. The human ships changed tactics immediately. Instead of metal rods, they began firing explosive missiles. But these were not the sophisticated guided weapons other species used. They were simple chemical rockets that exploded on contact. The swarm machines, still configured to resist kinetic impacts, were torn apart by the blast waves and shrapnel. Commander Blake's voice joined the conversation. Pattern confirmed. The enemy takes approximately 8 minutes to adapt to each new weapon type. We need to change tactics every 7 minutes to stay ahead. What followed amazed every Zephyrian watching. The human fleet began cycling through different weapons in a carefully planned sequence. Chemical explosives gave way to nuclear warheads. Nuclear weapons were replaced by laser cannons. When the swarm adapted to energy weapons, the humans switched to acid sprayers that dissolved metal on contact. This is insane, muttered Dr. Zalek, the Zephyrian science officer. They are using dozens of different technologies, many of them thousands of years old, but the strategy was working. The swarm could not adapt fast enough to keep up with the human weapon changes. Every time the machines configured themselves to resist one attack, the humans had already moved to something completely different. Colonel Kate Rodriguez led the ground assault. Her troops landed in simple metal dropships and attacked swarm positions with weapons that seemed primitive compared to galactic standards. But primitive did not mean ineffective. Squad 2 hit that cluster with thermite charges, Rodriguez ordered over the radio. Squad 4, bring up the flamethrowers. Squad 6, I want high explosive rockets on those tall ones. The human soldiers moved with practiced efficiency through the ruins of New Zephyr. They used explosives to bring down buildings on top of swarm machines. They attacked with chemical weapons that ate through metal. When ammunition ran low, they resorted to hand weapons and personal courage. Lieutenant Commander Ben Taylor led a boarding party onto a crashed swarm ship. Instead of sophisticated cutting tools, his team used simple blowtorches and crowbars to break inside. The swarm's internal defenses were designed to stop energy weapons and advanced technology. They had no response to humans with hand tools and determination. Taylor to base, he reported as his team fought through the ship's corridors. Enemy AI seems to be having some kind of breakdown. It keeps trying to predict our next move, but we keep doing things it does not expect. This was the key insight. That changed everything. The Void Swarm was not truly intelligent. It was an advanced computer system with very sophisticated programming. But it was still just a computer, and computers could only work with the data they were given. The swarm had been programmed to fight logical opponents who used their best weapons first and followed predictable military doctrine. Every previous enemy had attacked with their most advanced technology and maintained consistent tactics. The swarm's adaptive protocols were designed around this kind of rational behavior. Humans were not rational in the way other species were rational. When standard tactics failed, Captain Morrison ordered his ship to ram a swarm command vessel. The alien computers could not understand why anyone would deliberately crash an expensive starship into an enemy. Morrison and his crew ejected in escape pods at the last second, but the swarm's decision trees had no protocols for suicidal attacks that were not actually suicidal. Commander Blake discovered that the swarm avoided certain materials completely. They will not eat aluminum, plastic, or organic compounds, he reported. Their programming classifies these as non-useful materials. The humans immediately began using these materials as weapons. Plastic explosives caused massive confusion because the swarm sensors could not properly classify the threat. Aluminum projectiles were ignored until they exploded inside swarm hulls. Organic compounds like wood and cotton were used to clog swarm machinery. This is not warfare, Dr. Zalek complained. This is chaos. Admiral Hayes heard the comment and responded with a human expression that Veltar did not understand. Doctor, sometimes chaos is exactly what you need. Our enemy was designed to fight orderly, logical opponents. We are being disorderly and illogical on purpose. The human attack continued for hours, with no two strikes being the same. They used weapons from every period of their history, from stone clubs enhanced with modern materials to nuclear weapons guided by primitive computers. The swarm's adaptation protocols began breaking down as they tried to counter dozens of different threat types simultaneously. By midday, swarm resistance was collapsing. The machines that had destroyed galactic fleets were being beaten by a species using technology that most civilizations had abandoned thousands of years ago. But the humans were not using old technology because they had to. They were using it because it worked. Colonel Rodriguez reported from the front lines as her troops captured another swarm facility. Enemy machines appear to be shutting down randomly. Their behavior patterns are becoming erratic. Commander Blake studied the readings from his instruments. The swarm's central processing units are overloaded. They cannot calculate responses fast enough to keep up with our tactical changes. We are essentially giving their computers too much homework. As the sun set over New Zephyr, The void swarm that had seemed unstoppable just days before was retreating. The surviving machines were fleeing toward their ships in orbit, abandoning the planet they had nearly consumed. But Admiral Hayes was not finished. All ships, prepare for pursuit. We are going to follow these things back to wherever they came from and make sure they never threaten anyone again. Veltar realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A species had not just survived the void swarm, they had defeated it completely. And they had done it by refusing to fight the way the enemy expected them to. Fight. The humans had won by being unpredictable, illogical, and absolutely relentless. It was a lesson that would change how every species in the galaxy thought about warfare and problem-solving. The pursuit of the fleeing void swarm led the combined human and Zephyrian fleet deep into unexplored space. Ambassador Veltar stood on the bridge of Admiral Hayes's flagship, watching the strange readings on their sensors. The swarm ships were moving toward something massive hidden in the dark between stars. Admiral, Commander Blake reported, long-range scans show a structure ahead. It appears to be artificial and very large, roughly the size of a small moon. Dr. Amy Foster, the human fleet scientist, studied the readings with intense curiosity. She was a small woman with red hair, who seemed excited by everything she discovered. This must be the swarm's central command facility. According to our analysis, all the smaller units we fought were controlled remotely from a central location. Captain Morrison joined the conversation from his own ship. Looks like we found the brain of the operation. What are our orders, Admiral? Hayes looked at the tactical display showing hundreds of swarm ships gathering around the massive structure. We finish what we started. But first, I want to understand what we are dealing with. Dr. Foster, what can you tell us about this enemy? The scientist had been studying swarm technology since the first battle. Her conclusions were disturbing. Admiral, I believe the void swarm was created by a species that thought very much like current galactic civilizations. They built the perfect weapon to fight logical, predictable opponents. She brought up holographic displays showing swarm programming. Structures. Look at these decision trees. Every response is carefully calculated for maximum efficiency. The creators assumed their enemies would always use their best weapons first and follow standard military doctrine. Veltar studied the data with growing understanding. You are saying the swarm was designed to fight species like mine? Exactly. Species that evolved through cooperation and logical thinking. Every major galactic civilization follows similar patterns because cooperation was necessary for survival on most worlds. You developed space travel through careful planning and shared knowledge. Dr. Foster changed the display to show human tactical patterns from the recent battle. But humans evolved differently. We come from what we call a death world. Earth tried to kill us in thousands of different ways, so we learned to survive by being adaptable rather than cooperative. She pointed to the chaotic pattern of human attacks. We succeeded not by being the strongest or smartest, but by being the most unpredictable species on our planet. We hunted animals larger and faster than ourselves by being too stubborn to give up and too creative to be stopped. Admiral Hayes nodded, which is why the swarm could not handle us. It was programmed to fight rational opponents, and we are only rational when it suits us. The massive swarm facility ahead was now visible on the main screen. It looked like a dark metal planet covered in geometric patterns and glowing conduits. Thousands of smaller ships moved around it like insects around a hive. The sight would have terrified any other galactic fleet, but the humans seemed more interested than afraid. Analysis complete, Commander Blake announced. The structure appears to be mostly automated. Central processing cores are located in the deepest sections, heavily defended by overlapping shield systems and weapon platforms. Captain Morrison studied the defenses with professional interest. Standard approach would B to probe the outer defenses, map weak points, then launch a coordinated assault on the least defended areas. Which is exactly what the facility expects, Admiral Hayes replied. Dr. Foster, if this thing was designed to fight logical opponents, what would happen if we did something completely illogical? The scientist thought for a moment. The central. I would try to analyze our actions and predict our strategy. If we did something that made no tactical sense, it might cause processing delays or even system errors. Excellent. Morrison, I want you to take your task force and attack the strongest point of their defenses. Use your biggest weapons and make as much noise as possible. Morrison's voice carried amusement. Ma'am, that sounds like a terrible plan. Exactly. While you keep their attention, the rest of us will do something even more stupid. The human fleet split into multiple groups, each with orders that seemed designed for failure. One group attacked the heavily defended northern pole. Another group landed troops on the surface to fight their way through millions of defensive robots. A third group launched nuclear missiles at sections that appeared to be solid armor with no strategic value. The Void, Swarm Central AI tried to analyze these attacks and found itself unable to understand the human strategy. Every action seemed wasteful and counterproductive. The computer systems began dedicating more and more processing power to figuring out what the humans were really planning. Meanwhile, Admiral Hayes led a small group of ships toward what appeared to be the least important section of the facility. It was heavily defended, but contained nothing of obvious strategic value according to their scans. The perfect place for a logical opponent to ignore. Blake, are you certain about these readings? Hayes asked. Yes, ma'am. The quantum resonance patterns indicate this section contains the primary control matrix. It is disguised to look like a waste processing facility. The human ships approached using what Dr. Foster called aggressive incompetence. They flew in patterns that wasted fuel, used weapons that seemed inappropriate for the targets, and generally acted like they had no idea what they were doing. The swarm defenses focused on the larger, more obvious attacks happening elsewhere. Lieutenant Commander Taylor led the boarding party that would infiltrate the control center. His team carried equipment that looked primitive compared to swarm technology, but had proven effective in previous encounters. Cutting torches, chemical explosives, and hand weapons that the enemy computers did not recognize as threats. Remember, Taylor told his team as they prepared to breach the facility, these machines think in straight lines. We think in circles, loops, and whatever shape seems like fun at the time. The boarding action that followed became legendary among human military units. Taylor's team fought through corridors filled with defensive robots using tactics that no military academy would ever teach. They used mirrors to confuse optical sensors, played loud music to overload audio detection systems, and attacked critical systems with tools designed for ship maintenance rather than warfare. The swarm's defensive. I could not understand opponents who used entertainment devices as weapons and treated serious combat like an elaborate joke. The more the humans acted like nothing they did made sense, the more processing power the AI devoted to figuring out their non-existent strategy. Captain, Morrison's diversionary attack was equally effective at causing confusion. His ships used weapons in combinations that seemed random, targeted structures that appeared to have no military value, and constantly changed tactics for no apparent reason. The swarm's tactical computers began experiencing cascade failures as they tried to counter strategies that existed only in their own programming. Dr. Foster monitored the enemy AI's responses from the flagship. Admiral, the central processing cores are showing signs of severe overload. The system is trying to calculate responses to hundreds of different threat scenarios simultaneously. How long until complete system failure? Hayes asked. At current processing load, approximately 30 minutes. But the I might adapt or shut down non-essential functions to compensate. Hayes smiled with predatory satisfaction. Then we need to give it even more to think about. All ships implement protocol. Chaos. Protocol Chaos was a human military doctrine that had never been used against an external enemy before. It involved every unit in the fleet acting independently with orders to be as unpredictable as possible. Ships attacked random targets, used inappropriate weapons, and followed tactics that changed every few minutes. The result was beautiful chaos. Human vessels darted around the swarm facility like angry insects, striking without warning and disappearing before defensive systems could respond. They used everything from nuclear weapons to signal flares as tools of destruction, treating the massive enemy fortress like a playground for military creativity. Inside the control center, Taylor's team reached the primary processing cores. Massive quantum computers that controlled the entire Void swarm network were housed in chambers the size of city blocks. They hummed with power and glowed with internal light as they tried desperately to understand what the humans were doing. Blake was right, Taylor reported. These computers are having nervous breakdowns. I can see error messages scrolling past faster than I can read them. The final blow came when Taylor's team did something no rational enemy would ever attempt. Instead of trying to destroy the quantum computers with sophisticated weapons, they used simple electromagnetic pulse devices, the kind of basic technology that other species had abandoned centuries ago but humans still used for specific applications. The EMP devices were too primitive for the swarm's defensive systems to recognize as weapons. When they detonated, they sent crude electromagnetic waves through the quantum processors. The delicate computing systems, designed to handle the most advanced attacks possible, were completely unprepared for such a simple form of interference. One by one, the processing cores began shutting down. Across the galaxy, Void swarm machines that had been terrorizing civilizations for Mon. 3 weeks after the destruction of the Void swarm, representatives from across the galaxy gathered on the Zephyrian homeworld. The Great Council chamber had been hastily repaired after the swarm attack, but scorch marks on the walls still showed how close they had come to total destruction. Ambassador Veltar stood before an assembly unlike any in galactic history. Every major species had sent delegates. The crystal builders of Andromeda, the gas-dwelling philosophers of the nebula worlds, the machine intelligences of the core systems, and dozens of others. They had come to meet the species that had accomplished the impossible. Admiral Hayes sat at a simple metal table with Captain Morrison and Dr. Foster. They looked out of place among the elaborate alien dignitaries with their ceremonial robes and exotic technologies. The humans wore plain military uniforms and seemed more interested in the technical discussions than the formal ceremonies. Supreme Chancellor Kethfer of the Galactic Council rose to speak. He was an ancient being whose species had guided galactic civilization for thousands of years. His 4 eyes gleamed with something between gratitude and confusion. "Honored humans," he began, "the Council of Worlds owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. You saved not just our individual species, but the very concept of galactic civilization. We would like to offer humanity full membership in the Galactic Council, along with access to our most advanced technologies and exclusive trading rights." The offer was unprecedented. No species had ever been granted immediate council membership. The benefits were enormous. FTL technology that was thousands of years ahead of human capabilities, medical knowledge that could extend lifespans indefinitely, and economic opportunities that would make Earth the richest world in the galaxy. Admiral Hayes listened politely to the complete offer. When the Chancellor finished speaking, she stood and looked around the assembled delegates. Her response surprised everyone in the chamber. "We appreciate the generous offer, but we must respectfully decline council membership. A wave of shocked murmurs ran through the assembly. Dr. Zalek, who had worked closely with the humans during the crisis, spoke up. Admiral Hayes, perhaps you do not understand the full scope of what is being offered. Council membership would advance human civilization by thousands of years. We understand completely, Captain Morrison replied, and we are grateful for the offer. But joining the Council would change us into something we are not meant to be. Dr. Foster activated a holographic display showing comparative data about different species. Every Council member species follows similar development patterns. You achieve spaceflight through cooperation and logical progression. You solve problems by building on existing knowledge and working together toward common goals. She changed the display to show human development patterns. We evolved differently. We succeed by being unpredictable, by finding new solutions to old problems, by refusing to accept that anything is impossible. If we joined your council and started thinking like you think, we would lose the very traits that allowed us to defeat the swarm. Chancellor Kethver looked confused. But surely you want to advance your civilization. Our technology could solve every problem your species faces. That is exactly why we cannot accept, Admiral Hayes explained. If you solve all our problems for us, we stop learning how to solve problems ourselves. The next time the galaxy faces an impossible threat, you would need someone who thinks differently than Council species think. But if we become a Council species, we will think like you do. Ambassador Veltar began to understand. You are saying that your greatest strength comes from being outsiders. Exactly. Every species in this room evolved on worlds where cooperation was the key to survival. You learned to work together and think logically because that was how you stayed alive. We learned to be stubborn, creative, and unpredictable because that was how we stayed alive. Dr. Foster brought up images of various galactic crises from the past. Look at your history. Every time you face a threat that does not respond to logical solutions, you struggle. The Void Swarm was just the latest example. You need someone who approaches problems from completely different angles. Captain Morrison smiled with that tooth-showing expression that still made many aliens uncomfortable. Think of us as your backup plan. When conventional wisdom fails, call the crazy humans. But Admiral Hayes was not finished. However, we would be honored to establish mutual defense agreements with any species that wants one. If you ever face another impossible threat, you know where to find us. Chancellor Kethver considered this. And what would humanity want in return for such agreements? Just ask nicely, Hayes replied. That is what you did the first time, and it worked out pretty well. The simplicity of the answer seemed to confuse many of the delegates. Species that thought in terms of complex trade agreements and political calculations could not understand a civilization that would cross the galaxy to help strangers just because they asked for help. Dr. Foster provided the explanation they needed. Humans have a saying, we are stronger when we work together, not just as a species, but as a galactic community. The Void Swarm threatened everyone, so everyone was worth protecting. Over the following days, individual species approached the human delegation to establish their own agreements. The terms were always simple and straightforward. If you need help with something impossible, ask. If we can help, we will. No complex treaties or political obligations required. The warrior clans of Beta Centauri were among the first to sign. Their leader, Battle Chief Krexmar, understood the value of unpredictable allies. Your tactics make no sense, he told Captain Morrison, but they work better than anything we have tried. We would be honored to fight alongside humans. The machine intelligences were fascinated by human problem-solving methods. Your approach to the swarm crisis was completely illogical, their representative stated, yet it achieved perfect results. We must study this paradox further. Even the normally isolated gas dwellers wanted defensive agreements. Your species thinks in patterns we do not understand, their translator explained, which makes you valuable allies against threats we cannot predict. As the formal meetings ended, Ambassador Veltar found himself walking with Admiral Hayes through the rebuilt sections of New Zephyr. The city was recovering quickly, but everyone who lived through the swarm attack would remember how close they had come to extinction. "Admiral," Veltar said, "I must ask you something that has been troubling me. When you first received our distress call, your species had never traveled beyond your own star system. How did you develop faster than light travel in just 3 days?" Hayes smiled. "We did not develop it. We stole it." The Zephyrians stopped walking. Stole it? During the first months of the swarm invasion, several of their scout ships reached the outer edges of our solar system. We captured one and took it apart to see how it worked. Human engineers are very good at reverse engineering technology, especially when we are motivated. But the principles involved are incredibly complex. It should have taken years to understand swarm technology. It would have taken years if we tried to understand it completely. But we did not need to understand it. We just needed to copy it well enough to make it work. Sometimes you do not need to know why something works. You just need to know that it does work. Veltar realized this was another example of human unpredictability. While other species would have spent years studying the technology before attempting to use it, humans had simply built copies and hoped for the best. It was dangerous, illogical, and completely effective. As they reached the memorial being built for those lost in the swarm attack, Admiral Hayes placed a small metal plaque among the alien monuments. It read simply, "From Earth, in memory of friends we never met but came to help anyway." "Will humanity ever rejoin galactic civilization?" Veltar asked. "We were never part of galactic civilization to begin with," Hayes replied. "But that does not mean we cannot be friends with it. Sometimes the best way to help your neighbors is to remain yourself rather than trying to become like them." 6 months later, the first human monitoring stations began operating throughout the galaxy. They were small facilities with minimal crews, designed to listen for distress calls and provide early warning of new threats. The humans called them fire stations and staffed them with volunteers who were eager for new adventures. Dr. Foster's final report to Earth Command became required reading at military academies across the galaxy. "We did not save these civilizations because we are stronger or smarter than they are. We saved them because we are different from them. In a galaxy full of logical, cooperative species, sometimes you need someone crazy enough to think that impossible problems just need creative solutions." The phrase "call the humans" entered common usage among council species. It became synonymous with hope in the face of hopelessness, with the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy was a species that would respond to cries for help, not with calculations of profit or political advantage, but with the simple question, "Where do you need us?" And whenever that call went out across the stars, the answer always came back the same way it had the first time. "Help is on the way."